Okay, so today I'm back to do one of these page one critiques, this time of one of my favourite books, Senlin Ascends, and I have a copy. Just to show you these aren't literally page one critiques, because often the writing starts halfway down a page on page one, so I compensate with some more from the next page. Today I've been doing an awful lot of copy editing, which is basically the second stage of an edit on a book. So you start off with a content edit, so it's more an editor's opinion about how the story hangs together and top level comments, but there's also some correction of typos and some advice on wording. That the copy edit is really focused on sort of grammar and punctuation and these sorts of things, which makes it very dry and boring. So spend a lot of time hopping through, sort of accepting changes of S's to Z's and whatnot in some certain words, and the ellipsis, three little dots. All of mine are together, and they like to have a space between each one. So there's like 40 million of those to change. I will show you the sort of thing I've been looking at. So this is the book that wouldn't burn, which is going to be with you in May, and has an incredibly short prologue, which is 2 tiny lines. The first arrow hit a child. That was the opening line, and you can see there's then the tagline, which I've suggested, which the editor has deleted because it's not part of the book, and then there's a whole bunch of comments down the side, which I could enlarge on. The tagline being it's just sort of line you put on the front of a book potentially, or in the marketing. Some books will swallow you whole and not even spit out your bones. Ivar Eventari fell into a book once, and neither he nor it was seen again for 102 years. And then you press on, and you get chapter 1. You can see all sorts of markups there. So let's go back to the thing that we're supposed to be discussing, which is the first page of Senlin Ascends. And before I get into that, I'll just say something about the book because I'm a fan. This was a book that came second in one of the blogs for the SPFBO. I think it was the second one we did, SPFBO 2. So it didn't make the finals, but because it was so hotly contested with the book that the blogger did put forwards, which in fact then came second out of the entire 300 field, I read it, and this book is, I guess, it's a lesson about self-publishing, and I guess it's both a cautionary tale and a positive tale. Depends if you're a cup is half full or a cup is half empty sort of person. When it came to the contest, it had on Goodreads 50 ratings, and the number of ratings you have on Goodreads are basically an indicator of sales. You multiply it by some small constant number and it turns into roughly how many sales you've got. 50 is not a lot of sales. If 50 ratings does not equate to a lot of sales. And that had taken Josiah Bancroft 3 years to accumulate. Then after I started hyping the book on our fantasy and on my social media, it reached 500 ratings in the next few months. And then 2 years later, it was on 5,000. And I was noting there that the average rating it had on Goodreads was still above 4.5 when it had 500 ratings, which is an indicator that it's a very good book. It's hard to hang on to a high rating as your ratings increase, and a lot of people, they'll write a book and they'll get 100 ratings and say, "Oh, I've got 4.5, I'm doing brilliantly," but that is going to nosedive. And we can see that now the book currently, it did get picked up by a publisher and traditionally published, and now it has 23,000, nearly 24,000 ratings, and the average is 4.14, which is much more reasonable. Some demographics will rate higher. If you look at young adult books, they typically, the readership there give much higher ratings, and you're more likely to see 4.5s with young adult. But outside, people like books like Game of Thrones or some of the Sanderson books, you really won't see 4.5 pluses and a high number of ratings. So this is clearly an excellent book that could get a high rating and lots of people reading it. And yet, after 3 years of Josiah doing his level best, no one had read it, basically. And that's because it was my theory that you need to get above a certain critical mass in terms of reading before a book has much of a chance. Because one of the main things people like to do when they've read a good book is discuss it with other people. If you get a clump of people discussing a great book, that interest will generate, it will pull in more people to read it, and that snowballs and you get a successful book. But if you've only got like a few dozen people in the world reading this book in a 6 month or a year period, the chances of those people meeting and having a conversation about it are quite small. So you need a critical mass of a few hundred or 1,000 people looking at this book in a small space of time, and suddenly their enthusiasm, if it is a good book, generates that snowball effect and something to take off. So I call it the noise floor in physics and engineering. Processes that have a lot of noise in, a lot of randomness. In order for a signal to be seen above that randomness, it has to reach a certain size. And I liken the interest in self-published books to be noise. There's a lot of noise, a lot of small level interest in many books, but it's not until you manage to concentrate a certain amount of readership on a book in a certain smallish time period that you're able to lift above that. And then after that, it's got to be a brilliant book. It's got to earn its keep. But even the most brilliant book in the world, which I think this is one of them, if it's below that noise floor, it really stands no chance, because people just aren't going to see it in sufficient numbers, no matter how much they like it when they do see it. I've got a piece here that says about what this is a quote from Josiah Bancroft. He when he came to the SPFBO, was basically about essentially to chuck it in, to not push this anymore because it wasn't going anywhere, and he sort of shot all his guns. It says, I actually did a lot of marketing in the past 3 years. I sent my book to more than 100 indie reviewers, about 20 of whom reviewed the book in some form. I've been rejected by BookBub twice. I did 4 or 5 giveaways on Goodreads. I purchased ads on Reddit, Goodreads, and Google. I was writer of the day here on r/fantasy last year. I, to my chagrin, paid several $100s for a couple of reviews from disreputable sources. I later submitted the book to more than 150 agents and about 100 publishers. I started a website, a Facebook page, and began attending conventions where I sometimes wore funny clothes as I mewed at the teeming throngs, please buy my book. The SPFBO was the absolute last gasp of effort I had in me. After entering a contest, I fell into a general drunken despondency, which led to the deletion of my Facebook page, the renunciation of the series, and an abrupt departure from my full-time job. I then believing I was having a heart attack, I woke my wife in the middle of the night to drive me to the hospital, only to learn I was having a panic attack. Those were not my finest days. And then weeks later, all of this started to happen. I don't think I necessarily deserve this attention, but I'm very grateful for it. And Josiah is a really nice, humble guy who's obviously tried enormously hard, harder than I would try, because I don't have it in me to go to cons and dress up and try and generate that interest. And even though he did, and he's very engaging, I've seen him on video and whatnot, he just couldn't manage it. And this, in my opinion, again, is a really great book, and a lot of people agree with me. So there's a cautionary tale there, in that you can have this fantastic book and it just won't go anywhere. And then there's some hope that I guess something like the SPFBO can just give you that momentary focus of interest. And even then, the SPFBO basically failed him. It was that I sort of took an interest, and I was so taken with it that I just demanded everyone else read it. And when you're demanding on behalf of someone else, you have more power. I have more power to enthuse people about his book than I do about my own. Anyway, let's go to the first page. So there's some spiel there about don't get offended, which is my standard boilerplate. And then here's the page. I'm just going to read the page. And before we do this, I've said in the past that you don't have to have a brilliant first page to have a brilliant book, and you can have a brilliant first page and the book can be fairly mediocre. So this isn't a foregone conclusion what I'm going to say about this by any means. It was a 4-day journey by train from the coast to the desert where the Tower of Babel rose like a tusk from the jaw of the earth. First, they had crossed pasture land, spotted with fattening cattle and charmless hamlets, and then their train had climbed for a range of snow-veined mountains where condors roosted in nests as large as haystacks. Already they were further from home than they had ever been. They descended through shale foothills, which he said reminded him of a field of shattered blackboards, through cypress trees, which she said looked like open parasols, and finally they came upon the arid basin. The ground was the colour of rusted chains, and the dust of it clung to everything. The desert was far from deserted. Their train shared a direction with a host of caravans, each a slithering line of wheels, hooves, and feet. Over the course of the morning, the bands of traffic thickened until they converged into a great mass so dense that their train was forced to slow to a crawl. Their cabin seemed to wade through a boisterous tide of stage coaches and ox-drawn wagons, through tourists, pilgrims, migrants, and merchants from every state in the vast nation of Ur. Thomas Senlin and Maria, his new bride, peered at the human menagerie through the open window of their sunny sleeper car. Her china-white hand lay weightlessly atop his long fingers. A little troop of red-breasted soldiers slouched by on palominos, parting a family in checkered headscarves on camelback. The trumpet of elephants sounded over the clack of the train, and here and there in the hot winds high above them, airships lazed, drifting inexorably towards the Tower of Babel. The balloons that held the ships aloft were as colourful as maypoles. Since turning towards the tower, they had been unable to see the grand spire from their cabin window, but this did not discourage Senlin's description of it. There is a lot of debate over how many levels there are. Some scholars say there are 52, others say that as many as 60. It's impossible to judge from the ground, Senlin said, continuing the litany of facts he had brought to his young wife's attention over the course of their journey. A number of men, mostly aeronauts and mystics, say that they have seen the top of it. Of course, none of them have any evidence to back up their boasts. Some of the explorers even claim that the tower is still being raised, if you can believe that. These trivial facts comforted him, as all facts did. Thomas Senlin was a reserved and naturally timid man who took confidence in schedules and regimens and written accounts. So that's the first page. And I'll jump to the the conclusion. I think it's a decent first page, but it's by far the best first page I've ever read. Now, this is an example where I feel the book that follows outshines the promise of the first page. It's by no means a terrible first page. It has many excellent things in it. Let's have a look and see what I've said. And again, caveated by the crap at the top here. This is all my opinion. So one of the things that this page doesn't do, which I often advise, certainly at the sort of non-masterclass level, and I'm not able to give masterclasses. So for most writers, I advise you want to present some sort of problem in the first page to interest and engage the reader and to prompt questions. This one doesn't have that, and there's almost no tension in it. So we open with, it was a 4-day journey by train, and that's not a particularly spectacular first line, but it's not bad either. It quickly establishes a potential setting. It's likely we're on this train, and it's got a nice simile in there. So it's got in it an inherent promise of good writing, of high quality prose. So that's interesting. A tusk from the jaw of the earth, that's a nice little line. And now some more description of the things they're going through. That puts us basically on the seat in the train. It gives us a setting, and this, although we don't have a point of view yet, this description is already telling us something about the person doing the describing, which in my video on description I said is the hallmark of good description. The charmless, for the charmless Hamlets, is a judgmental thing. It's already telling us about the sort of person who is looking out the window and seeing this stuff. And then the next line, already they were further from home than they had ever been. So this is really the only hint of tension in the page, this idea of being far from home, of striking out into new ground. So that's giving you a sense of potential, but also potential danger. You know, we are far from home. That's never exactly a comforting thing if you come from a good home. And it's reminiscent of these lines that are in the Lord of the Rings film, where Sam pauses and he says, if he takes one more step, it will be the furthest away from home that he's ever been. And I don't know if that echo there is intentional or not, but it certainly adds extra weight to that line because it carries the baggage of that memory, at least for me. And then there's more description, talking about these foothills and these cypress trees. But right here, we're doing, again, the thing that I encouraged every writer to do. I'm going to turn on the light because I started off and the sun was blazing in and I pulled the curtains and now it's getting darker and darker. That was clearly the last gasp of the sun when it was attempting to blind me again. So yeah, this is fine description in microcosm, because each of those two descriptions reflects the person doing it. Senlin is a school teacher, so seeing these hills as shattered blackboards is in character, and it's building him slowly, piece by piece, a net effect, not in one big lump, but laced in through the text. It's building this picture of him, and although neither of them have been named by this point, his wife, we're seeing her different take on the world. The trees are looking like open parasols, and it turns out she's a much more gregarious and fun sort of person. So the description is telling us about what's out the window, but it's also telling us about what's on this side of the window, and that's good writing. And then we're talking about coming into the sort of deserty area. We've got some nice description there, the color of rusted chains, and a bit of wordplay. The desert was far from deserted. It's just a nice sort of flexing of the language. It sort of makes you feel that you're in good hands there. And although we don't have any action, which is another thing I often say, you know, try and open with something actually happening, some sort of excitement. You've got nice to have a problem, but it's also nice to have some excitement, something happening that can immediately focus the attention of the reader. And here we have action of a sort, because we've got this growing sense of everything converging on this enormous tower, and that gives us this sense of forward motion, and that's what we want. We want a sense of forward motion that's giving us momentum, which is going to carry us on to the next page. We get this building picture of a very diverse crowd. You know, it's got soldiers, it's got pilgrims, it's got stagecoaches, oxen-drawn wagons. There's a mention of elephants. So there's a feeling of everything coming from all corners of the world to this place, which is asking a question. It's saying, why are they coming here? What's the big deal? So that's good. You want to have questions. This building sense of excitement. We finish off continuing to talk about the crowd, even overhead, the airships, and it's not urgency, but there's a sort of inevitability to it, a flow, inevitability, this drifting inexorably. And it's not just the airships that are doing that, it's all of them are basically being sucked in, it seems. And we finish off with some dialogue. It's speech. It's not dialogue, because it's only him talking, and in fact his wife doesn't get anything to say until page 5. But it's nice to have something that is speech that gives you, because the way someone talks and what they choose to talk about give you a much, very rapidly give you a sense of that character. And here it is doing exactly that. It's talking about the tower, so it's world building, it's educating us, it's painting a picture, and it's opening questions. But there's also this way that this guy is basically you get the sense he's the older of the couple. He's lecturing his wife, and she's maybe not that interested. And he likes all the facts and figures. Maybe she's less fact and figure oriented. So it's all giving you a sense of Senlin's character, and yeah, and it is a sort of miniature info dump, but he is a teacher and teachers info dump, so that's okay as well. And the questions we end up with are things like about the tower itself. How can people not know how many floors it has? How can they not know if it's still being built? That seems unlikely and unusual. And then we can ask questions about the arrangement between these two people. How is this young wife with this reserved and timid school teacher? And all of that just stacks up a bunch of questions for us, maybe individually not that pressing, but a general sense of I'm interested, what's going on? Let me turn the page. So yeah, as a first page, perfectly serviceable. The rest of the book, in my opinion, considerably over delivers on the promise of the first page. One of the there are people who don't like this book, like there are people who don't like every book. You can go to the 1-star section on it and you'll find lots of opinions there. But one sort of frequent criticism among that small minority is the idea that the book is slow and that they didn't warm to the main character. And we can see that in the first page that it's taking a fairly leisurely pace. So we can see that in the very first instance, and we can also see hints that the character isn't some sort of charming hero, that he has what we might consider flaws, that he's interested in these trivial facts and telling people about them who maybe don't want to hear, and that he's calling these hamlets charmless. But the point here is that, as it's suggested by the title of the book, Senlin Ascends, this whole book and trilogy is a journey through the tower itself, but also a sort of metaphorical journey on which Senlin himself goes through many changes. And if you're going to take a journey, you may as well start, somewhere where there's some room for positive change. If he was all of the good things you might want in a character you're going to follow, then he wouldn't have any room to improve, anywhere to go. And so when a book is about the character and their development as much as anything else, then this is exactly the sort of character you want. If a book is just about the plot and the adventure, then maybe you want this character who's very comfortable and entertaining and fun right from the start. So you can just go, oh yes, I like this guy, let's go on an adventure, and you don't expect him to change much. Here, that's not what we're getting. So yes, it's a truly good, excellent book. This wouldn't be the example of the perfect page one that I would bandy about, but it's a very good page one in many ways, and I commend you to read the rest of the book. Right, I'm going to do the bit where I hunt for the button to turn you guys off, and there it is. So thanks for listening.